We're really excited to have with us this evening Mr. Latore, who is the Assistant Director for Career and Match Advising at Rowan Virtuous School of Osteopathic Medicine in New Jersey. He's earned his master's degree in counseling. His experiences led him from working from student affairs to academic and career development. In his position at Rowan, he provides support for students on medical specialty selection and preparing residency program applications. A lot of his focus is on understanding the nuances and preparing for a career in the desired field, increasing competitiveness in applications, and ensuring a successful and desirable match with the residency program. And if I recall correctly, one of his most exciting times of year is the match, as we're coming up on that. So we're really excited to have you with us this evening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, definitely. Oh, sorry. Just had it open. Definitely always look forward to the match. Okay. Now, how would that go here? Everybody can see the presentation?
Yep.
Awesome. Yes, and thank you so much for the introduction. So I'm very excited to be able to give this presentation today. It's honestly pulled from a couple different things that I'll work with my students on, and through the phase of really years 1 to 4. We start pretty early with CV preparation. And so I will go through a little bit more in depth on that side of looking at the CV, and as well focus on letters of recommendation and gathering those, especially during your clinical rotations, as well as interviews and what to think and prepare and expect in the interview season. So I do want to start a little bit big picture with the timeline of the match cycle first, and parts of the ARIS application, just to kind of recognize, where do we see these pieces and where do they really play into our time during the match application process. So pre-application, we're looking at right about now, spring into summer of 3rd year. For anyone that might be prior to, of course, 3rd year, this is just, I think, really what to look ahead to. As this, I would expect pretty similar across most institutions, if not slightly different kind of time frames of when things would fall. But this is mainly what we would expect with our students, that they're starting on gathering their formal CV around this time of winter into spring. And I asterisk those areas that we'll be focusing on tonight as a reminder. But just thinking about, where they'd really fall, and that time frame is intentional for a lot of different purposes that would come up around now that we'll talk about for using the CV, as well as collecting letters of rec. This I have at every point here for a reason, because we are constantly collecting letters of recommendation, right, from these clinical rotations in 3rd and 4th year. And then as we move into throughout this time frame into the summer up until September, we're preparing the rest of our application, other items of our application as well, and generally working up to that point of submitting our application for the main match in September, usually that last Wednesday of September. Around that time too, we're starting 4th year rotations, doing level 2, step 2, maybe exams. But then once we apply, we see this point of switch over to the main kind of match cycle involving interviews, and then, of course, ranking and matching. The interview season, we're at the tail end, or really just finished up for our current 4th years. It's a long, arduous cycle that could start as early as October, maybe. But mostly we see our students in November, December build up with the residency interviews in 4th year, tail out in January, as then they build up to do their rank lists in February. So that's where our current 4th years are at right now, right? So that's that full cycle, big picture match week happening in March. And so again, focusing today, we'll definitely look at the CV and letters of recommendation. But just as a full kind of look at everything that goes into the application, I think this is important in considering even more so, where does the CV fall? Where does the letters of rec fall in comparison to these other items? So we have one CV that really becomes your main application. I'll explain further in the residency application process that we're using. We don't change that for different specialties. So if anybody's interested in applying to multiple specialties, this is focused on that one main application and everything you'd want to display to all readers. The letters of recommendation, we'll talk about how to kind of organize, but generally you'd see applicants have 3 to 4 letters for their application. Some other items that go in there too, if anybody was additionally curious at this time, the medical school transcript with your grades, personal statement, you'd usually write one per specialty at least that you're applying, the MSPE, the medical student performance evaluation with additional grades and information about academic progress, as well as board score transcripts. I think that CV really becomes the main basis of your application that you'd want to have parallel to these other items. So think about your personal statement probably would not mention many or any experiences that are not on your CV. So where that becomes that skeleton of your application is really important for setting up the rest of the application. Okay, now focusing on the CV, some areas that are common in the CV would be these listed, as you can see on the left-hand side. CVs are going to look different, maybe for different industries, for different maybe types of jobs, certainly, but generally they have a very main focus that it's almost anything and everything. It's going to have some limits, and we'll talk about that, but it stands for the curriculum vitae. So it's the story of your life. It's the amalgamation of your life that, you know, you're adding everything in there that would want to mention. However, we still, of course, encourage our students to really focus on those pertinent things that are going to stand out to the readers that they're going to be looking for. We do a lot of focus at our institution, really focusing on what is not just important to program directors in general, but for your specialty of interest, and diving into that and looking at the data, looking at what's typical to stand out on the CV. Why is this important for the application? As I mentioned, it presents the pertinent facts about your story, your experiences all together, and it's the main reference for the rest of the application. The uses for the CV. So while I did mention it is used as the main ARIS application, I want to clarify that it is not uploaded as its own document to the ARIS application. A lot of students I find do get this confused and wonder, why do I need a CV if I am not actually uploading a document? Well, it, for the most part, can be copied and pasted into main portions of the application that would focus on experiences, as you saw the sections listed before, honors, awards, publications. How you'd write it on the CV generally is setting you up for how you would write it on the ARIS application. I'll tell you, some things have changed, especially over the past couple years with the ARIS application. It's kind of getting farther, I think, from what a traditional CV setup would be. For instance, the experiences section was joined all together, work, research, and volunteer. And now we have to kind of pick and choose what we want to put, as we have only 10 max experiences, but that's not the focus today. But with the CV, I think still sets you up for other uses as well. Asking letters for letters of recommendation. Letter writers very much appreciate CVs, we found, to get more information and more understanding about an applicant. Elective applications. This is the time for a lot of students applying for electives for fourth year auditions, sub-Is. They are looking generally for CVs as well. Any additional scholarships or awards or research opportunities, maybe just other things that might come up that you would want to apply for, or be able to provide additional information about yourself, general networking. But we found definitely at the institution that it helps your career advisor, it helps your MSPE writer to have more information about you too. So maybe internally at your institution, you have someone that could help you, mentor you, advise you. Having a CV for them can be helpful as well. A lot of the time we look at the difference between CV and resume, as there is a traditional difference. I think very much more so than ever now as we see resumes develop into much more colorful, design heavy type of documents. They are very unique usually to the industry in maybe what certain sections might be included. Again, with the CV, you have your kind of general sections you would have, that is the touching base and this well-rounded kind of look at your experiences. And with that, it's providing an overview of academia and medicine in this sense, and your connection with that. It's all relevant information. Still, it's not going to be extra fluff. We're not trying to have a super long document for no reason. Some of our students will have lots of research, and that's great, but maybe we should hone in a little bit because it could easily get to like 10 pages, and we don't need that when applying for residency. So while there's no traditional page limit, we suggest our students stay within 2 to 5 pages to still keep it concise, to still keep it grounded and to pertinent things. You continuously update it, of course, with as you're going along in your time in medical school. Your resume, you traditionally see a little bit more concise. Usually it's limited to 1 to 2 pages. There used to be that old idea that it's like 1 page for a degree, bachelor's 1 page, master's or doctorate, more additional pages are added. You stick to a full page in the design focus of like making it clean and clear. With a CV, you can end in partial part of the page. Again, it's more of that running list. It's not something fancy. And it has that eye appeal factor for resume. So here's a visual example of that. You can clearly see the left-hand side, a CV, very basic to the point, and focusing on those main section areas, again, that is not trying to add a lot of fluff or extra color or fanciness to it. On the right-hand side, you see a resume example that does just that with the color and the borders and the summary and additional things that might be specific to an industry, what they're looking for, separate from what we would traditionally see for CV, especially a medical student CV. Experiences before medical school is a topic that comes up a lot with advising students. What should I include? Traditionally, in applying for a residency program, they'd want to see things that are more relevant. I mean, that's not much different than any other industry as well. I mean, you want things that are relevant, that are recent. So in adding things before medical school, now we're dipping back a number of years back. You want to think about, is this relevant? Is this important? And some areas that might help to consider that is considering, is it related to health sciences and medicine? Did you have an experience as a scribe or something that you can, put down that may seem fairly, less impactful, but it still does have that connection to your career? Does this account for a significant amount of time? I've had students that did maybe some volunteer work that was over 5, 6, 7 years, and they really dedicated themselves to that. Well, that was a good amount of time of your life that you were focusing on something, consider including it. Maybe involved a heavy leadership or important role. I had students that started or initiated something that might have been a fundraiser, or I had a student recently say that they had developed an app back in the day, and I was like, that's awesome, that's cool, like let's talk about that, and can really speak to some special skills or leadership that would be appreciated. So if it hits one of those, likely it's probably a really good idea to add in there. But at the end of the day, if anything, I would ask our students, do you see yourself talking about this significantly in an interview? If yes, then likely just include. If it's important to you, you really would feel sort of way if not including it, then leave it in. Otherwise, probably best to leave out. On that note, by the way, anything on your CV and really then translate it over to your main residency application, you could get questioned about. So always think about that way. If something's there, you could get asked about it. Things to remove on the other end would likely be these pieces. Now, there could be some students that argue otherwise. Again, if it's important to you, keep on, but usually that's where we see these things dip out. So Dean's List or other smaller, maybe acknowledgments from undergrad. At this point, it's not going to be as interesting to the residency programs. Shadowing preceptor experiences. Again, this could be argued sometimes, but usually we see that program directors are really looking at the formal clerkship experience that you've had, and since you've had likely a good amount in third year into fourth year. They're going to put much more attention to that, where you have heavier responsibility versus being somewhere that you're shadowing someone. Short-term irrelevant work experiences, we see a lot of part-time customer service, summer jobs. Those all can be, I'm sure, great, career starters, work experience builders, but likely they're not as relevant at this point. Scholarships received for undergrad, again, unless it's like maybe a heavy honor or something you received in New Jersey. We have like the NJ Stars Scholar Award going into undergrad, and it's like if this is not something maybe super significant, leave off. And other awards and activities, especially from high school, and that's going way back now. So let's definitely consider if that's even relevant at all. When a section is empty, sometimes students are not able to complete each section. And so with that, we would say that you don't want to just have it there and put NA. You definitely want to make sure that that is left off if there's nothing that can fit into that section. But the typical that we definitely want to see on any CV, education, obviously you're going to have something there. Certifications, a lot of times students forget they have some certifications, BLS or CPR type of trainings or different things that you're getting just naturally in your education that you can list down, if not anything else. And then interest, skills, and hobbies. There's gonna, I'm sure, be something that you can come up with to put in the section. And I was just talking to a student today about this, that you'd be surprised how often you get asked about your interests and skills, and the extra kind of section, even though it's at the bottom and often kind of pushed aside. This is a section that could be a great conversation starter. So I would definitely say these three, if not any others that you can, include to their best opportunity. But if nothing, if you can't fit anything into a section, that's totally fine. Leave it out. A lot of students may get concerned around, well, I'm not well-rounded then. I didn't have publications or presentations, and so I cannot include this section. That's the case. You don't have anything to put, but don't get so worried about that, and instead focus on what you do have. Focus on what you do have to offer, and really highlight that in each way possible. And then that will really stand out. I've had plenty of students too that, like, maybe they lacked in one section, but they made up for it in other ways. I've had plenty of students that had lots of service, for instance, and then maybe not as strong in like the research end, and it's worked totally fine for them. Research versus publications and presentation section. So sometimes this gets confusing as far as what do I include where, and when we have these different sections. So again, there's typically a research section, there's typically a publications and presentation section that we see. The research section would include any research activity, typically that could be smaller, could be larger, experiences that you list out individually, very much in a format similar to other types of experiences. So if you think about work experience, a leadership experience, volunteer experience, what are we listing? We're listing the role and the role you had. I mean, if it's a work experience, what was your actual title? So in this sense, what was your position? The organization. So where did you do that? If it was a college, if it was some other individual kind of private research you were doing, and the summary of work tasks. And that could be in bullet format, it could be in narrative format. Our students take the choice that they want and how they like to write it out. But the idea is that's what you're definitely including, to focus on the actual experience, giving information maybe as to what the focus of the research was, but especially what your tasks were. What were you accomplishing? You may include here whether it resulted in a publication presentation or not, but you could definitely include a pending status of publications and presentations here. So that's where it's unique to the next section, that typically in the publications presentation section, you're only including things that are formally accepted or already published and presented. So with that, you're listing it in the AMA style. You're focusing on what would be a formal citation of that work, author, title, location of publication, presentation, right? We see typically in the AMA style. you're citing that. You're not writing a summary description of the work that you did. You would include that in the research section. So this is really the one opportunity in the CV. We could see things get doubled up a little bit because we see that you're placing it in the research section for a reason. You're giving the description to your work. The publication section, if it was accepted or published or presented at that point, as that formal citation of your work. So other times we would not typically double up on on things that we did on the CV. We're only entering it once on our CV, but we could see that here potentially. But also because sometimes we figure there's research experiences that result in multiple different outcomes. We have maybe 2 presentations we did, an oral presentation, a poster presentation. We also were accepted for publication. We can write all those things out. Maybe it varied in our outcome. So that's where I think it's a great opportunity to include in both sections if you can for different reasons. Other common errors that might be seen, filling a CV with fluff, or just like I was kind of saying before, it's extending the length for no real important reason for a lot of pieces added in there. I mean, if I'm going to get a CV that is 9, 10, 11 pages, I'm going to want to cut it down. Even if it's a lot of great things, you know, you have going, let's really try to hone in, focus on those important things that you did, because as a program director looking at that, imagine how confused they might be on what was actually important or most significant to you if they have this long document to go through. They don't have very much time when they go to review things for looking at offering interviews. So definitely making sure that you have that concise and thought out, that everything on there is going to be our most important. Repeated verbs, I've seen, I mean, just repeated words in general, but I think especially with the verbs. So when we're writing out experiences, we're typically writing in, again, either that bullet or kind of summary paragraph format, that we're trying to really highlight action verbs and make sure that those verbs are reflective of our skills and abilities. We managed blank, we coordinated blank, organized, led, presented on. We're varying these verbs intentionally to highlight those skills and abilities that we gained and developed in each experience, right? So with that, we don't want to keep repeating. We don't want to say, I see a lot of time coordinated. And it's like, okay, well, that's great, but let's try to see if we can vary that to make sure we highlight different things that you did or learned or gained. Inconsistent font and formatting. It's okay if you're going to vary slightly from section to section based off the needs of that section. Again, publications isn't going to look exactly like research, but we need to keep consistent with the fonts, with the size of the fonts, and the basic things in how we're formatting. We don't try to get into too much unique formatting with our CVs. We keep it very simple, bullet, 1 indent maybe at most. Like trying to keep it simple will only help you. So we avoid tables. Sometimes I've seen where people insert like an invisible table to kind of set themselves up. Well, if you make changes, maybe that might mess up your design. Like keeping everything as simple as possible will only help you, and keeping consistent. It looks nice and clean from the eye. Trying to be design heavy, again, we said that's not typical for the CV. You're entering colors, entering different fonts and different things. And then for getting page numbers, so I didn't mention this before, but page numbers is really helpful, really good to have on the CV, because you can have this longer document. It's really nice to have it clear where you're at in that. Somebody prints it out and it's 5 pages. It'd be nice that, you know, they could easily pick up where they are. All right, so we'll move to letters of recommendation. With letters, and the next section won't be as developed as the focus on the CV, but I want to give some recommendations to kind of keep in mind overall. This will definitely differ per specialty, but generally with the overall approach, we see 3 to 4 letters are submitted for every application, specialty application, primarily from clinical rotations in 3rd and 4th year. You would collect these letters from, and each letter is about 1 page in length, maybe a little bit longer. for the letter writer to complete. They're writing a summary of their focus on you and evaluation of you, and working with them and your skill-based knowledge. And generally, it should be very positive. So people you're asking, you'd want a solid letter to help your application for residency. There may be some unique letter types, and especially for internal medicine, I'll focus on today. Why is this important for the application? The overview of clinical skills are mentioned in the letter. And with that, there is one other section, the MSPE, that does get usually to focus on clinical evals from your rotations in third and fourth year. But this letter allows them to get more space, more focus, and usually is based off a more personal connection you've made and them working with you. It assesses fit within your specialty. So in gaining these letters, we'll talk about in the next slide how you'd want to focus on ones from particular specialties, and that's only helping the program director see you in that way, fitting into that specialty. And it's the only confidential piece that is written about you that is included in the residency application. So all the other pieces you get to see, you get to view or get to know from your medical school, even the clinical evals that you would have on the MSPE, those are your public comments. Like, this is that one section you don't get to see. And I would recommend that you waive your right to be able to see, which I'll mention. But the idea is that it is providing that confidential piece that definitely residency program directors will trust. So the general LOR approach, you would typically see, again, that 3 to 4 letters that you're gaining. We would recommend that 2 letters of recommendation are gained from to people within the specialty you're applying. So if we look at internal medicine, you're getting 2 letters from those within internal medicine, the specialty overall or a subspecialty of it. So like our students, for instance, have a couple opportunities while on clinical rotations because they actually get to see internal medicine as a general specialty rotation, and then they get to see at least one subspecialty of it. Actually, sorry, they see 2 now. We have the change in curriculum. So definitely different opportunities even in third year, but fourth year as well. You could ask for letters from electives, auditions in fourth year. You would seek physicians or surgeons from within the field. They should be from clinical rotation experiences. Sometimes students will get that confused with, oh, I worked with shadowing this physician for a few years in first and second year or into third year. That's typically not a source of a strong letter of recommendation because they're not as aware of your responsibilities of being active on a rotation. So you'd want to seek from clinical rotation experiences. These are core to understanding your potential in the field, again, are providing that perspective for you within that specialty versus other letters that you might get from different specialties. And those can be helpful as well. So first, again, 2 letters from within the specialty. You'd want at least 1 more from any specialty to complete out your application. So sometimes there are programs that look for 2 letters, but typically we see a lot of programs want 3 letters to be good to apply to any program. Having 3 letters, you should be good to go. So one additional could be from the same specialty. We could say, again, internal medicine. Maybe it could be from a different specialty that you made a good connection with otherwise. And if we think, okay, we're applying to internal medicine, think about what might be connected. Pediatrics, family medicine. I could get a good letter there. It could highlight some different things and provide some variety in my application. That could be really helpful, right? So consider what the benefits could be. At the end of the day, you only want to be getting letters from people you really established a decent connection with and would trust would write something good. Additionally, there is 1 more spot, so a 4th letter spot you can use. 4 is the max. You can't submit more than 4 letters. And that 4th spot, I would suggest to only utilize if you have a good option. So we're not just adding, just like the CV, we're not adding fluff into our application. We're only using this spot if it's really going to be worthwhile. So I would say then you're adding 1 additional letter. It could then be from a clinical or non-clinical experience at this point, since we only need those 3 from those clinical rotations. we can have an additional that might be from a research advisor or mentor or faculty team member that you built a really strong connection with, that again could provide some variety to your application and provide a new perspective. So just to recap, 3 are typically required and 2 from within that specialty. Some unique letter types. I included a couple different specialties here, but this would be just in case you were curious if there are certain letters that might be unique to specialties. There are, and this could continue to change in the future. And actually, there's one I left off here that it's not as popular, I would say, but the orthopedic specialty, orthosurgery, also is looking at a standardized letter, gaining more popularity. But emergency medicine, internal medicine, OB, these have all adopted a standardized letter format. What does that mean? It's basically you're just giving this template to your potential letter writer to fill out, just like a clinical evaluation on a clerkship rotation. They're providing quantitative and qualitative feedback rather than just writing out a narrative letter for you. So whereas you typically might approach someone, say, hey, can you write a letter of recommendation for me? And they're submitting that privately and you go on your way. In this sense, you're handing them this template. These can be found on the appropriate websites for those specialties. The SLO, as it's known, standardized letter evaluation for EM, really kind of put this into the focus, I think, for other specialties, that it really became super helpful for PDs. It's the highest rated item that's of importance to PDs for emergency medicine, and has really shaped out that specialty further. So internal medicine, OB took note of that. And so I am just in the recent past couple of years adopted the standardized evaluative letter, which is very similar to that SLO. Additionally, the specialties, internal medicine, OB, adopted a chair letter. I think this goes much farther back than even the SLO, but the chair letter basically is a chair of your department of either internal medicine or OB creating a letter for you. It's going to look different for institutions. I know even some institutions may not have a Department of Medicine chair, and so you may seek a chair person that is at a separate site or institution potentially. And so sometimes that can be a bit trickier depending on your school, depending on where you're at, but it could be something that you want to keep note on for any one of these types of programs that they are looking for a specialized letter. A few tips with asking for a letter. You would want to ask, I suggest in person. It provides a genuine opportunity to get that connection established further, and show your interest in the specialty. You can have a conversation around it. You can also see their response. And sometimes potential writers may not be as keen to writing you a letter. It's not as often as they would be eager to write you one, but it could happen. And with that, we would rather know sooner rather than later, and in a genuine way, that, okay, maybe they're not completely open to that. And so with that, I would suggest you're asking in an open-ended way. Something like, do you feel that you know me well enough to write me a strong letter of recommendation? Or would you be open to writing me a letter of recommendation? This is leaving room to say no, but providing an opportunity to work together further might help in that. And that could be something that you're offering in person much more easily, I think. See how they feel out writing you a letter, and if they're like, oh, not completely sure at this point, or maybe they'd appreciate more time with you, you can offer that. You can say, is there an opportunity for me to return, maybe on a future time that you have more downtime or weekend or something to do that. Send the writer your CV. This is where it goes back to having that CV. Send the link to access the ERAS letter of recommendation portal. I'm not going to go into this tonight, but there is a formal way to submit that into ERAS, and having that submitted to them is a part of the process in collecting that. And you'd follow up typically after a couple months. I suggest my students have like a goal in mind of when they'd like to hear back, and make sure they touch base again with that letter writer. Additional tips to close out this section: you'd collect more letters than you need. So having options is always good. rather than having less than what you need. You'll have a better understanding of what a quality is. I think a quality letter is sorry later. So as you get into like fourth year, you'll have much more strong understanding of maybe experiences on rotation, who you're making connections with. So don't be too afraid to start asking earlier on for letters. And if you're not sure, I don't know if this is going to be the best letter opportunity, ask for it, collect it, and then later analyze if you're going to use it. Letter writers don't know if you use their letters. So it's good to just add them into the bank, to have them as an option, and decide later. You can waive your right to view letters, and we do suggest this at our institution. I think that'd be typical, that you are not reading them, and that only helps for the programs to trust the letters more, that you were keeping them private. You properly label any chair letters as such in ARIS. That's that one unique option that would be typical for senior applicants. There's another option for what is it, reapplicants, basically into the match, or those that are graduates there that you wouldn't use. But the chair letter option you could use as a additional label if needed. And you can submit letters after sending your ARIS application. It's a possibility. I would definitely talk to your advisor to see if that is any good idea for you, depending on your timeline. It's not usually recommended. You want to have everything ready to go when you go to apply. And finally, the residency interview. The residency interview, again, is typical that you'd have this between any time after applying in September, October to January, but primarily we typically see the interviews November and December. There's one for each program, though they're going to vary in structure and length. And I mean one as in like one day that you would typically have your residency interview. Many are still happening virtually ever since COVID. We definitely saw that switch to pretty much 100% going virtual. And there's been that slow move to see more in person again, but you could expect both for this next match cycle. Why is this important? Of course, the application gets you to get the interview, but the interview is really pertinent to getting you ranked. And that is going to see that, move to them really knowing you as an applicant, having that formal, genuine connection with you to understand you and know if they want to hire you and fit into the team. Some formats that you'd see would include a single interview format that may be just one-on-one or individual with multiple different people at the same time. So it could be like a panel of people. This is very common that you just have just about one single interview for any PGY1 positions if you're applying to those, for instance, preliminary transitional year. But for a categorical, larger residency program, you're likely going to see much more as a part of your interview process. So one type might be a round robin, or otherwise known as like multi-station interviews, that you're going to move from place to place and maybe table to table, or from broken up into, say, like hours, that you'll have 1 hour here and then 1 hour there, that you move to different places and see different groups of people. These could include program directors, any other leadership, faculty, the chief resident, or other residents. So you're getting different interactions with different people, and they're all collecting their own feedback and perspective from you as well. Additional components could include, and I saw a lot of this this past cycle, in-person tours, orientations to the programs. That could be where you start off. I saw a couple of students, they go in and they start off with more information about the program, so they are informed going into the rest of their interview day. And that's helping them, but also it's testing you a little bit to kind of see, like, hey, well, how are you analyzing and understanding the program and seeing your fit in it? And then meet and greet events, especially when in person, sometimes virtual, and longer interviews, that you have this opportunity to just have a more casual setting. But don't be fooled by that. They're still interviewing you as well in those kind of experiences. I'm going to have a few types of questions that we'll look at. So common questions, behavioral questions, and tough questions. Common questions, pretty basic things you might see come up. Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why you're interested in this program? These things we can expect to pretty much see almost in every interview. With these, since we know we're going to expect these basic questions, we'd want to outline probably some bullet points, have some preparation into answering these questions, knowing what to say and what to include. That doesn't mean you're going to completely memorize an answer. You never want to see completely rehearsed. So it's that natural way of utilizing what you want to say into a more genuine conversation. So that's why I say bullet points and not actually writing out a full script of exactly what you're going to say. But these you're probably going to prepare some of the most directly because you're going to get them. You're going to know that they're coming. Behavioral questions, we would say that you still want to be very prepared for, but it's going to be a little bit tougher to know exactly which behavioral questions you're going to get. But I'll tell you, these become more and more popular, we would still expect a good section of your time focused on asking you about experiences that you have and what what you have experienced in the past or what you could experience in the future that might be more hypothetical. So, for instance, tell me about a time you received negative feedback. How did you handle this? Or discuss a time when you had a conflict with a peer or resident or friend. How did you handle this? So, really digging into an experience that would be related, trying to understand how you'd work through that systematically and what would be especially your outcome of that or follow up to that situation. So we recommend the STAR method in approaching a question like this. You're breaking it down into 4 different steps. You're understanding the situation, setting it up for them to see what was the situation you're walking into, the task that you had at hand, so what you were responsible for in completing maybe, or what the main task you knew you had to do to handle the situation, on the action that took place following through with that task, breaking down the steps to do so, and the result, sharing what outcomes there were, actions that were achieved, and ultimately what you learned. You always want to look at a reflection way of looking back and saying, okay, maybe you could have done something a little bit different, but maybe you know just gain this experience and know better kind of for moving forward. Or and how to handle a similar situation. So with that, the STAR method, you really can't go wrong. I'll know some students will have this in their head and take a second and think, okay, STAR, let me work through this. And I would definitely work through practice questions of behavioral so you get really comfortable, even if not with specific questions you're going to get, but generally how to look at them. And our last type of questions we'll focus on today is tough questions that might dig a little bit deeper into some of those areas that you're a little less comfortable about. So, for instance, what is the big obstacle you've had to overcome if you know that you faced a tough time during medical school or even before? Are you prepared to talk about it? For students that have extended leave time during medical education or failed a course or something, like definitely be prepared to talk about these things. Have a summary going back to that STAR a little bit, and think about how you reflect and grew from that. If you had any issues with board exams as well, or struggles and otherwise academically, definitely being prepared to talk, and any potential red flags otherwise too that might be something that could come up. Maybe they see it already in the application, maybe not, maybe they're not acknowledging it directly in the interview, but likely they'll know if it's going to be on the application, they've seen it, and they've already offered you the interview at this point, so they want to get to know you further. They're trying to look at a reflection of that. What did you learn? So practicing ahead of time, being clear and concise to the point, not providing extra detail that's unnecessary, always ending on that positive note and considering what you learned, how did you grow from it, how will this experience make you a better resume. And finally, just additional tips to prepare: practice, practice, practice. So as we were looking at every one of these areas, you want to practice on, be prepared, be comfortable with writing out ideas, bullet points, as well as I would suggest experiences that you'd want to speak about. If there are definitely things you want to bring up, figure, having a kind of bank of those ready to go is going to be helpful, whether you use all those experiences or not. So writing those out ahead of time in bullets or somewhere for you to, kind of review before going to interview is going to be helpful. Utilize various professionals for support, including any advisors or faculty available to you to practice interviews. Do your research, attend networking events for information. A lot of these happen in the summer into fall. Knowing the information listed on the website, if it's listed out there, you're expected to know it. Pretty much it's already ready available to you. So definitely know what's available. Prepare your space, especially for these virtual interviews. You're gonna still wanna put a lot of thought and effort into how you're dressed, what the physical space looks like, what does your background look like, avoiding any distracting items, keeping minimal, and of course, any technical things. When coming on tonight, had a little bit of a slip up technically, but you always want to be prepared ahead of time to have a backup. And so I had my second computer, I was ready to go. Making sure your Wi-Fi is good. We do interviews all the time, and you wouldn't know, imagine how many times Wi-Fi cuts people out. So definitely just being good to go in all those ways. Have questions prepared for the interviewers at the end of the interview, and dress for success. And that would be all the tips I had to give tonight for these areas.
Well, thank you, Nicholas. That's been very helpful. I think there's one question there. Kara, you want to read that question?
Yes, we have for a character letter, would it be acceptable to have research mentor write it, even if that person is not a physician, that person is a PhD?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely for that additional letter, we were looking at as that fourth spot. I've seen so many great opportunities students have brought up to offer a letter that, again, is going to provide something unique, a little bit different than from your clinical rotations. They had a really strong relationship with a faculty member, a research advisor. Some great opportunities have come from letters from those individuals. So that could be, it could be a non-MD, PhD. I've seen different other individuals that definitely, again, were some great opportunities, past bosses sometimes, but should still be a good relationship.
Okay, we have, I believe, another one. Hold on one second.
Kara, was there another question that was there?
Yes, 1 second. If a program does not specify if they require a chair letter or an SEL, would you recommend using the optional fourth letter of recommendation as a chair letter? To keep it standardized, would you recommend submitting a chair letter and 3 letters of recommendation to all programs?
That's a great question. Yes, and there's going to be probably more that you'll see that will either be recommended or not even anything listed for mentioning a chair or SEL letter rather than requiring it. We found we did a survey of local programs, and I'm in the New Jersey area as a reminder, in the Mid-Atlantic area. It was about 18% of programs had said that they recommended it, and even less required it. So with that, I'd say, you want to consider what are going to be still at the end of the day, what are their best options for letters. So if you don't really feel as confident with that SEL for whatever reason, or chair, sometimes that chair letter maybe is not going to be super personal. If we're being honest, if you're not super close to that chair, maybe other letters would be better in place of it. But that's a good idea to keep it as a fourth letter option, so where you can still fit a space for it, but really still make sure you have 3 other solid letters. Yeah, that's a great option.
You mentioned questions that should be prepared for the interview process to ask them.
Mm-hmm.
What type of questions are you talking about?
Yeah, so questions always at the end of the interview, I think would be good to have ready to go. So that was here on this slide. Basically, I mean that at the end of the interview, and this could be in any one of those formats, right? So single format, maybe the multiple, that you have a chance at the end, usually for each one of those, to ask questions to the interviewers. And in asking questions, it's not really basic things you want to be asking. Again, if there's things on the websites that you can read or whatever ahead of time, you want to know those things, but maybe you use those as a platform to turn into a potential question. So if I'm talking to the program director, what are you, maybe you reference, I see that you have X activities or opportunities for research or whatever. What are you interested in growing further with your program, or what do you appreciate about your program particularly, or can you tell me more about X? I read a little bit about it. For those that might be in different positions with residents, change your question a little bit for them and understand that, you know, they have a different position, they have different experiences and information they can offer. Whenever you're acknowledging too, I found that people's individual positions or experiences, if you can read a little bit or research a little bit about them, they're going to love that. They're going to love that you did research not only in the program, but onto them as well. And so it's just going in, showing, you know, some information, but also able to take more information and gain from them. You can get a wealth of knowledge.
Do you want to describe, you said dress for success. You want to be a little bit more specific about the
Sure.
do's and the don'ts as far as your physical appearance?
Yeah, so I think we might see in various industries now that it could be much more casual wear than maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. But I think in interviews, never a bad thing to be formally dressed, if that's a suit, if that is, you know, making sure you're covered up in basic colors. I think is still a good rule of thumb: blues, grays, blacks. You know, these pieces that we would traditionally think about in being in formal wear, business formal, not tuxedo formal, but making sure that you're definitely in that formal setting, not business casual. So right now I actually have a jacket over a sweater. That would be a little bit more casual still. It may be, you know, you kind of read it a little bit depending on the setting. For instance, like a meet and greet type of event, that might be a little bit separate from that formal interview day. Sure, I'm sure you could play off business casual a little bit more, but typically in that interview, you're dressing up formally for that.
Okay. Any other questions, Kara, that we have come in?
None have come in.
Okay.
We just got one, sorry.
Go for it, Kara.
Okay. We have one. How does the
Anybody
SEL?
want to raise their hand and ask at this point? Okay.
Sorry, Dr. Good, we have a new question. So how does the SEL work with ERAS? Do we provide the SEL template to the physician who will write our letter of recommendation before we send them the ERAS request for a letter? And is the SEL template is found on which website?
So there is a standard SEL format, standardized evaluative letter format, that is recommended to institutions to adopt. It's on the AAIM website that developed the SEL and recommended that programs start using it, that institutions start adopting it. We created our own version of that at our institution, and a lot of medical schools did create their own versions to be able to utilize at the institutions, rather than, I think, just the general template getting passed around. Like with the EMSLO or some other specialties, like it might be just a general website you go to. But I would check with your advisor or with your own kind of academic affairs department to see if it's something that was being planned on being adopted, and see if you have your own version of that if you're not sure, because I think that is the direction that colleges are going. But with the SEL, yes, you would take that template and then send that to the letter writer to be able to complete. We have our own hybrid version that actually is both an SEL and a chair IM letter. So it connects both pieces so that it's all in one. But that might not be every school too. So that's where it could be a little bit unique to your school's process and what you're deciding to do. But again, for what it looks like, is not much different than a clinical evaluation. It provides qualitative, quantitative feedback. And it's just adding that typically extra step to say, here's this template, instead of you just writing this narrative letter for me. You're going to complete this and then send this into ERAS. It would still ultimately get to the ERAS portal just the same as any other.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicholas. I'm just going to, we have a couple of faculty members online. I wonder if they wanted to add anything to what I felt was a really complete review that you've done. But you know, there are people with a lot of years of experience, and I just wonder if they had anything else to suggest to our students tonight.
Hey, Bob, it's Joanne Kaiser Smith. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Hey.
Nick, great job. I'll make sure I tell your boss that as well. I think the dress for success and the background is so important. I've done some interviews with people who are laying in their bed with their dog.
Yes.
And also, or they're on the bed with the pillows and the lampshades and what have you. It's so important to make sure that when you look and turn around, that what you're seeing, maybe it can be a blank wall, but it certainly shouldn't be the pillows in the bed. The other thing is, don't bring in your phone. Don't answer your phone during the interview. I've had friends who've had that happen. The applicant actually answered the phone to make a dinner reservation. It was ridiculous. You know, these stories you hear, but you don't believe it, but they came from reputable people. So leave your phone out, leave your coffee out, you know, if you need a water bottle, fine. But, you know, and take a deep breath and smile. Just smile, you know, and be happy, because we are human. We're not going to bite, you know. You've gotten this far. You can do this.
Also, great job. Just really quick, the practicing part. I think all the medical schools have entered into a contract with AAMC's Big Interview Medical. So when Mr. Latore is saying about practice, use Big Interview Medical. It uses the artificial intelligence, so you can record yourself. I think all of the interviews are still being done virtually. And so it's highly likely that you'll still be interviewing virtually when it comes time to interview. And so you can utilize the artificial intelligence. It'll pick up your eye contact onto the camera. It'll pick up how many times you say, it'll pick up your natural pauses. So make sure you utilize all of those resources and practice. Okay. Great job.
Dr. Tolentino, I think you are dressing for success tonight, so I'm going to give you points for that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, Dr. Good.
Okay. Well, I want to stay on time, as Tim said when we started. We start on time and stay on and end on time. I want to thank you, the speaker tonight. It was very informative, and I thought it was very well completed. We will have this online, and Kara will be putting it up so everybody can have access to this. If you want to share this with your various organizations and clubs, this is available for you. Next month, we'll be addressing the third year. So those of you who are second year, that's your next step. Would be very important to be prepared for the third year. And as you're kind of going through this, a lot of the things we've talked tonight, be prepared for that ahead of time, so that the outline is filling in as you walk through your journey.